The bride in the forum. The forum in 67 CE is a living organism, hoofbeats on travertine. Hawkers pitching figs and garum. The heat rising in a wavering veil from the marble. Lictors clear a path with their fasces as the emperor arrives. And conversation falls into the hush that always follows danger. On his arm is a bride, shimmering with silks that traveled farther than most Romans will ever dream, threads reeled in China, dyes coaxed from Phoenician shells, stones that knew the dust of Arabian caravans. She moves with meticulous poise, the choreography of a woman who has learned that every gesture can betray her. Around them, the whispers wheel like starlings. They do not say empress so much as they murmur a name that feels like a shard of glass, Sporus. Because the city knows what the palace pretends not to, that the emperor's new wife was once a boy. And Rome, expert in rumor polished in bathhouses, traded across taverns and markets, borne by slaves and sailors along the arteries of empire, tastes the copper at the back of the throat that means scandal. The tale you've stepped into is not merely a tableau of excess, it is the anatomy of how power can bend reality around a single broken desire. But we don't begin with madness. We begin with promise. With a teenager of 16 crowned too soon, hailed as the dawn after storms. In those first years, Nero played the part history sometimes denies him, the benevolent princeps. He eased taxes, he poured money into public entertainments, he took the stage, yes. The emperor himself in mask and cotonai, delighting the plebs who felt seen by a ruler who wanted not only to be obeyed but to be adored. Coins struck from new dies showed a youthful profile and messages of abundance. Statues went up with the serene, classical calm that says, this is order. Senators fretted at the blurring of dignity and performance. But the streets were generous in their applause. For a time, it seemed the boy might steady the ship of state by making it sing. Yet absolute power is a room without windows. The air goes stale and sweet. The men who enter it learn to mirror, not to contradict. Petitions arrive already softened. Advice already bent. And the boy who loved applause discovered what every performer knows: silence after ovation is a void that demands to be filled again. And again. And again. The empire was 60 million souls large, only one of them could never be contradicted. The isolation shaped him slowly, like water worries stone. And what had been talent for theatre began to edge toward the need to write every scene beyond the stage, into life. And bodies. And the soft tissue of other people's choices. Then she entered the frame. And the plot sharpened. Poppaea Sabina, celebrated beauty. Quick mind. A woman whose gaze you could feel on the skin. Rome knew her before Nero did. She had already learned to navigate salons where politics, war, perfume and philosophy draped itself in gossip. Her beauty was a craft as much as a gift, unguents that smelled faintly of myrrh. Skin tended by slaves with pumice and oil. Hair trained into rippling awed her with heated irons and pins. But to pause at the surface is to miss the point. Poppaea was a strategist. She could read a room, then revise it. She could turn a conversation, then make the turn feel like your idea. She could measure ambition in the air and find the precise distance to stand from it so that it illuminated rather than burned. When Nero first noticed her, he was married. Octavia, daughter of the previous emperor, Claudius, was everything a dynasty requires on parchment: pedigree, legitimacy, the decorative thread that ties one reign to the next. She was quiet, reserved. And her virtues, the ones that keep households untroubled, were not the virtues that set imperial blood alight. The marriage had always been a contract with the state as witness. It did not furnish the young emperor with the intoxicants he craved. And he craved being seen. Poppaea was visibility made flesh. To walk with her was to double the number of eyes in any room. What began as a Roman scandal, the sort that sets tongues busy but leaves structures intact, tilted quickly towards something more dangerous: genuine obsession. The emperor discovered a new axis to orbit. And he moved the heavens accordingly. Guards began to appear around Poppaea, not merely to protect, but to monitor. To ensure that every gaze that fell upon her could be accounted for. Gifts arrived in a flood, jewels plucked from the ends of trade routes, textiles so fine they could pool like water, perfumes that, when uncorked, seemed to make the air itself lean closer. Portraitists were summoned and paid by the hour to capture a likeness whose value increased with the number of copies in the world. And not all those portraits were destined for public walls. Some hung where only one pair of eyes could see them, eyes that could not bear the intervals between presence and absence. The court adjusted as courts do, quietly, efficiently. As if it had always been like this. Those who wanted to prosper began to time their smiles to Poppæa's entrances. Those who wanted to survive learned to speak of Octavia in tones that made history sound like an old law. Still on the books. Rarely enforced. The momentum of state, even an empire's, can be hijacked by the gravity of personal desire when the person at its core has no counterweight. A festival was made more lavish than planned because Poppæa liked a certain music, an audience stretched long into the night because she kept her seat, a senatorial petition found itself delayed because the emperor was busy watching his wife move about a garden with a gesture like the promise of rain. Poppæa understood the calculus. She had not survived Rome by mistaking love for safety. She used her access to advance her family's interests. To staff offices with allies who would become a lattice under her feet should Nero ever tire of the theatre he had built around them. But she was not a cipher. Not a reflection, she kept a mind of her own in a world that punished minds like that. She could quarrel with him about policy, she could mock, lightly, cleverly, dangerously, his performances when they missed the mark. There was a paradox at the heart of her position, the independence that made her compelling also made her fragile. Because the man who adored her adored a version of her that always said yes. Reality never survived long in such company. Still, in these years before the break, Rome watched a magnificent facade and could not yet see the cracks. The emperor sang in gilded halls and raced in chariots to roars that shook the sand. He entertained foreign envoys with an ease that suggested an empire confident in itself. Even as the mechanisms of governance began to squeal for want of attention. And in the streets where you began, with their oranges and olives, their gamblers and beggars, the story grew legs. People repeated what they had heard from a cousin who worked in the Palatine kitchens. From a neighbor whose master knew a man in the Praetorians, that the emperor had rearranged the furniture of his life so that every chair faced Poppæa. That he had put aside Octavia. That he would marry the one who made him a god in his own eyes. When the wedding came, no expense was spared, but of that, more later. What matters for now is the slope. Imagine the line graph of a life, and mark the moment where the curve curls downward. It is not a cliff, it is a gentling toward disaster. The gifts continue, the guards remain, the portraits multiply, and the emperor, who once sought applause because it warmed him, now seeks it because without it he grows cold. He stations men around his wife ostensibly as a wall against danger. In truth, they are mirrors, reflecting her back to him so he does not have to consider what she might be when he is not looking. There are days, recorded in the dry language of historians, preserved between the scratches of scribes, when Nero simply watches Poppæa, unblinking, while she orders her day. They float to us across 19 centuries like a series of stills from a film, the woman arranging a robe, the emperor motionless. As if by watching closely enough he could make time behave. This is not devotion, it is possession dressed in devotion's clothes. Love, when it is love, makes room. Obsession replaces, it takes the shape of the beloved and becomes a key that fits no other lock. And then, because tragedy needs only a nudge, not a push, we draw close to the day when all the tension in this arrangement will discharge at once. But that belongs to the next act. For now, fix your eye on the forum again. On the curve of a jeweled neck in the sunlight. On the way rumor eats its tail. The city will soon learn how far a man will go to stitch a lost woman back into the fabric of the world. And how many others he will cut to make the thread.